Kael's bare feet hit the metal grate and the stench of machine oil punched into his lungs. He wore a mismatched set of pauldrons bolted directly into his shoulders, and in each fist he carried a weapon, a jagged cleaver in the right, a spiked chain coiled in the left. Gorek's face was a smashed-in puzzle of tusks and beady, porcine eyes, and when he saw Kael, those eyes lit up with a simple, delighted cruelty. He bellowed something that wasn't language, just noise, and the crowd bellowed back. Kael's heart hammered against his ribs. His hands were empty. He had no armor, no weapon. Just the thin gray slave tunic clinging to his skin, already soaked with nervous sweat. The oil floor squelched as he shifted his weight, and he almost slipped just standing there. "Any last requests?" the AI chip asked. Kael didn't answer. He was staring at Gorek, who began to move, a lumbering, ground-eating charge that sent ripples across the oil pool. The render's cleaver rose high. His spiked tail, something Kael hadn't noticed at first, lashed behind him, clattering against the floor. The crowd screamed. Kael dropped to one knee and pressed his palm flat against the slick, blackened stone. The oil was cold, gritty with metal shavings. And underneath, the solid reality of the floor, the molecular bond of surface against surface, the silent, invisible law that kept a foot from sliding endlessly forward. Friction. He could feel it. Not as a physicist would, not as a concept in a textbook. He felt it as a tangible thing, a tight, humming weave of connection singing beneath his fingertips. The sensation was familiar now, though it never stopped terrifying him, a cold, electric tug in the back of his skull, a hollowing out behind his eyes, like a memory being gently, irrevocably deleted. Somewhere in his head, a fragment of a lullaby from his childhood, a voice he could no longer place, flickered and went dark. He didn't notice. He couldn't afford to. Abstract larceny, he breathed, and his hand phased through the stone. It wasn't a physical phase. His flesh stayed solid. But his perception, his will, reached into the substrate of reality and closed around something that had no mass, no shape, only influence. He grabbed it and pulled. The floor buckled, not physically, but conceptually. A sound like 1,000 dry twigs snapping at once ricocheted through the arena, and suddenly every inch of that oil-slicked stone became unreality smooth, perfectly, impossibly, frictionless. Gorek was mid-stride. His right foot came down hard, expecting purchase. Instead, it shot forward as if the floor had vanished from under it. The render's massive body folded, his center of mass continuing its forward momentum while his feet skated wildly in opposite directions. The cleaver flew from his grip, spinning end over end across the arena to embed itself in the base of a holographic projector, which spat sparks and went dark. Gorek's arms windmilled, his tail whipped uselessly against the slick ground, and with a sound like a collapsing mountain, he smashed spine-first into the arena wall. The wall was studded with decorative obsidian pillars carved to look like screaming faces. One of those pillars connected directly with the small of Gorek's back. The crack that echoed through the sudden silence was wet and final. Gorek slid down, his legs splaying at angles legs were never meant to go. His porcine eyes were wide, confused, still blinking. A trickle of dark blood leaked from the corner of his mouth. Then the blinking stopped. Silence. The crowd that had been roaring for blood a moment before now sat in a vacuum of stunned quiet, 100,000 beings collectively forgetting how to make sound. The holographic screens all showed the same image, Kael, on one knee, hand pressed to the floor, his face pale and set, and Gorek the render crumpled in a grotesque heap at the far wall. Then, like a dam breaking, the noise returned, only now it was something else entirely. Shock. Delight. A roaring, stamping, frenzied ovation that made the oil under Kael's feet shimmer with vibration. Kael slowly straightened. In his left palm, curled against his chest, something pulsed, a small, invisible knot of warmth and tingle, like captured lightning folded into a marble. It was friction, the concept he'd stolen, now temporarily bound to him. He could feel its potential, the way it wanted to attach itself to some new surface, some new interaction. He could, if he wished, press it into a wall and make it cling with impossible grip, or hurl it into the air to make every projectile grind to a halt. For now, he held it, a thief clutching a jewel he didn't dare drop. Recalculating, the AI chip murmured, and if an artificial voice could sound bemused, this one did. Current survival odds, 100%. I'm not sure I have the processing power to parse how. Kael's knees threatened to buckle. A wave of nausea rolled through him. Stealing something that fundamental always left him hollow, like a word on the tip of his tongue he'd never remember again. He blinked, and for a split second, he couldn't recall the color of his sister's eyes. Then it was back, and he shoved the terror down deep. Before he could catch his breath, a gate on the eastern side of the arena hissed open. 6 armored guards emerged, their boots magnetically clamped to the now frictionless floor with a clank-clank-clank that seemed obscenely loud. They were Praetorian model shock troops, all gleaming black carapace and visored helmets, and they crossed the distance to Kael in a tight formation. One of them wrenched his arm behind his back, and Kael felt the cold bite of stun cuffs snap around his wrists. As they dragged him back toward the tunnel, the roaring crowd still battering his ears, a new sound cut through the din, a direct, private transmission that pinged inside his skull via the chip's receiver. It was a voice, but not one registered in the arena's standard comm channels. It was silk over steel, calm and deeply, profoundly curious. Interesting. The guards didn't react. No one else could hear. You stole something far more valuable than his life. Friction itself, pulled from the physical plane like a coin from a pocket. I've never seen such a clean extraction. The voice paused, as if savoring the word. Kael's blood went cold. Let's see what else you can steal before I dissect you. The transmission clicked off. The tunnel swallowed him, and the darkness closed in, thick as oil. The cell stank of ozone and dried blood. Kael pressed his back against the cold alloy wall, the stolen friction still coiled in his right palm like a living thing, a shivering absence that felt slick and hungry. No guards had come to beat him after Gorek's death. That worried him more than the beating would have. His AI chip hummed against his temple, a subdermal vibration he'd learned to ignore until it spoke. Statistical analysis. Your survival odds just jumped from 2.3% to 11.8%. The crowd's biometrics indicate ecstatic delight. You are now the most interesting thing in this sector. Congratulations. Kael squeezed his hand shut, feeling the friction pulse against his skin. He could almost remember the concept he'd lost, a fragment of a memory about a street vendor on Elysian Reach, the smell of fried protein cakes. The vendor's face was gone now. Just a blank space where recognition should be. He didn't know if it would come back. The overseer's voice from the chip, hours earlier, still echoed in his skull, I will have you on my table. He didn't sleep. Morning came as a klaxon and a shock baton to the ribs. Praetorian guards hauled him from the cell before the lights finished flickering on. No food. No water. The corridor walls were painted with the dried spray of old matches. Kael's bare feet slapped against cold gratings as they dragged him toward another gate, this one etched with a stylized lightning bolt. New arena, his AI murmured. Hazard profile, electrified floor panels. Variable activation pattern. Try not to step on the glowing ones. Thanks. I was planning to dance on them. The gate irised open onto a circular pit 3 times the size of the oil-slicked bowl. The floor was a patchwork of metal plates, some humming with a blue-white crackle that made the air taste of copper. Overhead, the crowd, hundreds of thousands of beings from a dozen species, pressed against the shimmering containment field. Their roar was a physical weight. Across the arena, a floating sphere descended from a hatch in the domed ceiling. It was the size of a small personal craft, its surface a seamless black composite studded with sensor dimples and weapon ports. It rotated slowly, scanning. A synthesized voice boomed from hidden speakers, overriding the crowd noise, Gladiator designate, Kael of Nowhere. Opponent, Hunter-Seeker Scarab Mark IV. Outcome parameters, lethal. Let the subjugation commence. The Scarab's weapon ports irised open, and a swarm of micromissiles vomited into the air, dozens of tiny projectiles, each no longer than Kael's thumb, trailing spirals of vapor as they fanned out and locked onto his heat signature. Kael ran. The first missile streaked past his ear, missing by a hair's breadth, and detonated against a wall in a burst of shrapnel and concussive force. More followed. He threw himself sideways, rolling across a metal plate just as it flared with electricity, the current snapping at his heels. His tunic smoldered. The air filled with the shrieking whine of homing guidance systems. They're adaptive, the AI warned. Dodging is a temporary solution. Approximate time until lethal saturation, 18 seconds. Kael's mind raced. Abstract larceny, touch was the trigger. He could steal concepts from anything his bare skin contacted. He'd taken friction from a floor. Could he take momentum from a moving object? A missile spiraled toward his face. He didn't dodge. Instead, he reached out, fingertips stretching. The moment his skin brushed the missile's casing, the world shifted. It was like plunging his hand into freezing water and pulling out a silken thread of pure velocity. The missile hung in the air, its engine still sputtering, but all forward energy drained into Kael's palm in an instant. It dropped like a stone, clattering harmlessly to the floor. The stolen momentum coiled in his grip, a taut spring of kinetic potential, invisible but tangible, vibrating with contained force. The swarm reacted, reacquiring target lock. Kael dove, slapping his free hand against the next nearest missile, then another, each touch ripping the driving force from the projectiles. One by one, the swarm stalled and fell, a hailstorm of dead metal. The crowd gasped, then roared. But his muscles screamed. The strain of sprinting and rolling through an electrified maze had bled him dry. His legs trembled, his lungs burned. He needed more than speed, he needed endurance. He touched his own thigh, pressing his palm flat against the trembling muscle. Fatigue, he thought, and pulled. The concept came away like peeling off a layer of dried sweat. Warmth flooded his limbs. His muscles unknotted, his breath steadied, and a surge of unnatural vigor shot through his nerves as if he'd slept for a week. He felt the fatigue settle into his hand, a separate, heavy thing, while his body became a razor-edged instrument. Neural integrity dropping, the AI said, a sharper edge in its tone. Concept stacking is increasing neural load. Short-term memory bleed detected. Kael, you just lost something. I can't tell what. He didn't have time to care. The scarab was already rotating, its main cannon aperture glowing with building plasma. He needed a weapon. The floor was littered with debris, shards of armor, a broken blade, a jagged piece of alloy plating as long as his forearm. He snatched it up. The momentum in his palm yearned to be used, a coiled serpent desperate to strike. Kael focused. The stolen momentum wasn't just a passive weight, he could push it, shape it. He pressed the coil of kinetic force into the metal shard, feeling it thrum violently as the stored velocity merged with the object. The shard began to glow along its edges, vibrating so fast it blurred. The scarab's cannon fired. A stream of plasma screamed across the arena. Kael threw himself flat, the heat singing his back, and cocked his arm. He hurled the shard not with muscle, but by releasing the momentum's direction in one explosive gesture. The shard became a streak of silver light. It crossed the 100 meters in a fraction of a heartbeat, punching clean through the scarab's center mass. The droid's system shorted, arcs of electricity spiderwebbed across its hull. It wobbled, then erupted in a deafening fireball that painted a containment field orange. The crowd noise became a physical assault, shrieks, bellows, the stamping of countless feet. Kael stood panting in the center of the arena, the last of the fatigue and momentum bleeding from his palm, leaving him hollowed out and shivering. Victory condition met, the announcer boomed. Gladiator Kael prevails. Guards rushed in. Kael let them drag him away. His head throbbed, and he realized he couldn't remember the last face he'd seen in the crowd. No, he couldn't remember the name of the station where he'd been captured. The name was just, gone. A hole in his mind shaped like a docking bay. He shivered harder. The cell was dark when they threw him back inside. Mara was already there, curled in the opposite corner, her insectoid frame folded like a praying mantis. Her compound eyes reflected the faint light from the corridor. She didn't speak at first, just watched him slump against the wall. Heard the explosion, she finally said, voice a dry rasp. They're calling you the concept thief now. Bookmakers are going insane. Kael rubbed his temple. I lost something this time. A memory. I can feel the edges where it used to be. The price, Mara said, as if that explained everything. All power has a price here. Before he could answer, the cell door hummed open. 2 Praetorians filled the doorway, their featureless helmets glinting. Mara. Match slot. Now. She rose without complaint, pausing only to touch Kael's shoulder with one clawed hand. Don't go empty before you have to. Then she was gone, and the door sealed behind her. Kael was alone. The iron gate groaned upward, and the roar of the Grand Nexus Coliseum crashed over Kael like a wave of molten noise. Sand clung to his bare feet, still cold from the holding cell's stone floor. Manacles bit into his wrists, their chain dragging a serpentine trail behind him. He squinted against the pulsing glare of the arena's flood orbs, each one a miniature sun suspended in the hazy upper tiers. The crowd was a living thing tonight, a beast with 10,000 throats, all howling for blood. The announcer's voice boomed in a dozen trade languages at once, a tinny echo from the translation relays embedded in the walls. The sensation of the season, the thief who stole friction, the slave who breathed silence into steel. Kael, the concept leech. Kael winced. The name they'd given him made his skin crawl. It was almost as bad as the cold prickle along his spine, the faint static whisper of his AI chip syncing with his neural pathways. In the corner of his mind, the chip's laconic voice hummed. Asterisk hostile match registered. Opponent data streaming. Warning, unknown dampening field signature detected in opponent's chassis. Probability of concept theft nullification, 97.3%. Asterisk. The manacles felt heavier. On the far side of the arena, a new gate lifted, but almost no sound accompanied it. No clanking gears, no hissing hydraulics. Just a perfect, unnatural silence that bled outward like spilled ink. The warrior emerged. He was tall, wrapped in matte black segmented armor that seemed to swallow light. His helmet was a smooth, featureless ovoid, but from its surface radiated a faint, prismatic shimmer, a distortion like heat over a reactor vent. The dampening field. In one gauntlet-clad hand he held a blade with an edge that gleamed not with metal but a greasy, iridescent coat. It repelled Kael's perception the way oil repelled water, just looking at it made his temples throb. Behind him, the gate sealed without a whisper. The warrior stood motionless, a statue of quiet murder. Kael's fingers twitched. Abstract larceny itched beneath his skin, that cold, grasping impulse that had become his only currency. He needed to touch something. Anything. But the space between them felt thick, a dead zone. He'd faced a droid with tricks, a giant with predictable physics, this was something new. A puzzle built to break his only edge. He took a step forward, dragging his chain, and the warrior moved at last. Fast. Beautifully, terrifyingly fast. One instant there, the next a blur that closed half the distance, the anti-concept blade singing a note that wasn't quite sound. Kael threw himself sideways, sand spraying. He could feel the null field wash over him as the weapon sliced air where his neck had been, a pressure in his skull like a vacuum seal. His ability recoiled, a startled animal inside his ribcage. Direct theft from opponent is impossible, the AI chip murmured. Asterisk the dampening field scrambles conceptual signatures. Suggestion, utilize environmental or self-targeted extractions. Neural damage risk remains elevated, asterisk. Great, Kael hissed under his breath. Self-targeted. He looked down at his manacles. The iron links, scarred from previous captives, glinted with the faint possibility of edges. Edges weren't sharp, not truly, but they held the concept of sharpness in their crude, bludgeoning shape. What if he took that? He didn't think. He didn't let himself. He dropped to one knee, gripping the chain with both hands, and pulled. Abstract larceny wasn't a knife, it was a hook you sank into the world's underlying dreams and dragged back something that had no weight. Cold erupted in his palms, a bone-deep cold that raced up his arms and lanced into his mind. The metal under his fingers went gray, then soft, as if centuries of wear had been crammed into a heartbeat. Sharpness. He felt it flow into him like a sliver of broken glass, lodging somewhere behind his left eye. The pain was immediate, a shard of glacier wedged in his gray matter. His vision shuddered, and the AI chip's warning ticked, asterisk concept theft complete. Neural pathway strain, 14%. Short-term memory fragmentation detected. Retrieving last secure memory, the station's name is, data strand corrupted, asterisk. The manacles fell away, their edges now rounded and blunt as old chalk. Kael staggered upright, the stolen sharpness coiling in his chest. He had nowhere to put it. Nothing to do with a concept so abstract. Then, without conscious command, his lungs expanded, drawing breath, and he felt the sharpness slither up his esophagus like a razor-edged serpent. An exhale. He aimed his open mouth at the charging warrior. The puff of air that left him was visible, a shimmering, crescent-shaped gale that screamed with 1,000-minute edges. It was breath turned to a wind full of invisible blades. The nullification field flickered, trying to collapse the anomaly, but the sharpness was already a made thing, a physical consequence birthed from stolen concept. The razor wind hit the warrior's chestplate and carved 3 parallel rents through the plating with a screech of tortured ceramics. Dark, oily fluid spattered the sand. The warrior staggered, his helmeted head tilting in what might have been shock. Kael didn't wait. His throat was raw, tasting of copper and cold moonlight. He scrambled toward the arena's perimeter where detritus from past battles lay scattered, a rusted shield, a broken spear, and a heavy, iron-headed mace half buried in the sand. He'd seen it the moment the gate lifted. The warrior was already recovering, the rents in his armor sealing with a gelatinous substance, but his silence was broken by a low, throbbing hum of overtaxed systems. He discarded the anti-concept blade, the weapon sinking point first into the sand, and lunged for the mace instead. The null field rippled wider. Kael felt his stolen sharpness dim for an instant, but he was already moving. He threw himself into a slide, hand outstretched. The warrior's armored gauntlet closed on the mace's haft at the exact moment Kael's palm slapped the iron head. Abstract larceny screamed through him. Another hook, another piece of the world ripped loose. Impact. The inherent ability of mass to transfer force, to shatter, to crumble. The cold flooded him again, deeper, and behind his eyes something fizzled like a dying star. His knees buckled. Pain blotted out the roar of the crowd. Asterisk neural overload. Memory strand severed. You have lost the name of the third moon of your birth system. Asterisk the chip's voice was distant, almost gentle. The mace swung down. It connected with Kael's shoulder. And it felt like a whisper. A petal falling. The head bounced off him with a dull thump, the warrior's follow-through overbalancing. The concept of impact had been stolen away, leaving the weapon a lump of dead metal. Kael laughed, a raw and broken sound. The giant had fallen to stolen friction, this silent killer would fall to stolen force. He surged up, spitting blood and whatever shreds of sanity he had left, and pressed his hand against the warrior's exposed neck joint. The null field shivered against his skin, but the touch was physical, and the theft he attempted now was a reflex, a desperate gamble. He stole nothing new. He couldn't. But he pushed the stolen sharpness back out, not through his breath but through his fingertips. Princess of a million splinters, the concept unspooled into the warrior's body. Armor seemed split. Tubes of synthetic muscle frayed. The helmet's ovoid surface cracked like an egg. The hum died. The warrior collapsed, a marionette with cut strings. Silence. Then the crowd erupted, louder than ever before. The tunnel back to the holding cells was a damp, echoing throat. Guards shoved Kael along, his legs unreliable beneath him. His head pounded with a nauseous rhythm, and the AI chip kept feeding him lines of diagnostic data he couldn't process. He could still taste the sharpness, a phantom bristle on his tongue. Would it ever leave? Or was it another permanent tenant in the crumbling tenement of his mind? A shadow detached itself from a side passage. A hooded figure, slighter than the guards, moving with a quiet grace that sent a spike of alarm through Kael's exhausted senses. The guards didn't react, perhaps seeing nothing, perhaps paid to see nothing. A slip of pale, high-quality paper was pressed into his palm, the edges crisp as a noble's collar. The figure leaned in, breathless and quick. Read it. Forget my face. Then they were gone. Kael stumbled into his cell as the iron bars clanged shut. Mara wasn't back yet. He unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Asterisk I can free you. Steal loyalty from the Imperial envoy during tomorrow's exhibition. P. Asterisk. The script was elegant, the promise vast. He stared at the initials. P. A prince. The rumors in the slave warrens were full of disaffected nobles and their silent wars. He'd heard whispers of a mysterious patron who bought. The stolen memory writhed in Kael's palm like trapped liquid light, a coiled thread of amber and silver that pulsed with a dying heartbeat. In his lap, Mara's head lolled, her three-fingered hands limp, her wide amphibian eyes now empty as dry wells. The cell around them was the same gray cube of rusted grates and stale air, but now the silence felt like a suffocating blanket. Kael didn't dare move. Every muscle in his body locked, horrified at what he'd done. The frayed edge of his consciousness still tingled with the neural feedback, a coppery taste flooding his tongue. He had felt the snag, the moment his thumb brushed her shoulder and his cursed gift lunged unbidden, ripping a strand of her being loose. Mara. Mara, look at me. His voice cracked. She didn't respond. The luminescent fronds on her neck, once flowing with soft bioluminescence, had gone dark. The memory fragment in his hand throbbed, and he could almost see the image trapped inside, a turquoise sky, 3 moons like polished opals, a city of spiral towers. Her homeworld. The face of someone she loved, the details already bleeding out of Kael's own recollection as his neural pathways overloaded. A soft chime trilled in his inner ear, the AI chip booting from its passive monitoring state. Asterisk Kael, you've extracted a cognitive identity concept. Estimated separation tolerance, 8.4 minutes before synaptic degradation becomes irreversible. You must perform a reverse larceny immediately. Asterisk. Reverse? I don't even know how I do it the normal way. Kael snarled, his fingers trembling around the pulsing light. He clenched his jaw, forcing down the rising wave of panic. The memory slipped against his skin like warm oil, threatening to dissolve into ambient neural static. Tell me how to put it back. There is no manual. You must invert the theft vector. Push, don't pull. The process will likely cause significant reciprocal neural trauma, and there is an 82% probability that the target's memory will suffer partial fragmentation. This has never been attempted. 72%. 82. He was drowning in her numbers while Mara's mind eroded by the second. Kael scanned the cramped cell, his cot, her cot, a dented hygiene unit, and, on a small ledge near the ventilation grate, a stub of incense Mara had lit earlier to mask the prison stench. A thin curl of smoke still rose, it sent something leafy and medicinal, a faint mimicry of tranquil fields. An idea crystallized through the fear. He needed focus. He needed to be still. And his power could steal anything. He lunged one hand forward, brushing the rising smoke. The concept he seized was not the physical carbon particles but the abstract property embedded in the incense's memory, the comet had been crafted to induce. A wave of unnatural serenity washed over him, cold and artificial, flattening his panic into a glassine lake. His heart slowed. The trembling stopped. This wasn't peace, it was the silent vacuum left behind when emotion was surgically removed. He felt a nauseating distance from his own horror, but his mind went quiet enough to work. With the stolen calm insulating his nerves, Kael cradled Mara's head and pressed his palm, the one housing the writhing light, against her forehead. The contact sent a jolt through him, a scream of resistance from his own biology. The abstract larceny instinct begged to yank again, to grab the rest of her, but he bit down on his tongue until blood salted his mouth and forced the vector in reverse. It wasn't a pull, it was a shove. He visualized the memory as a river flowing against its current, up his arm, through the conduit of his fingers, back into the vault of her mind. The light shivered, resisted, and then sank slowly beneath her skin. Agony, white, blinding, detonated behind his eyes. Kael felt neural pathways fuse and pop, a cascade of hot needles stitching through his cortex. His right eye blurred with afterimages of moons he'd never seen. His spine arched, muscles seizing as the stolen concept tore free of his grasp and lodged itself, ragged and crooked, into Mara's consciousness. He held on, screaming through clenched teeth, until the last tendril dissipated. Mara gasped, her body bucking against him, her amphibian eyes snapping open with a wet, disoriented blink. The fronds along her neck flickered weakly, blue returning in patches. She looked at him, then around the cell, confusion painting her broad features. Kael. What happened? I feel like I just fell from a great height, but the dream is gone. She touched her head, frowning. There was something about a city. But I can't, the colors are all foggy, and the faces are blurred. I think I saw someone I loved, but now they look like a silhouette on murky water. Kael could only shake his head, his throat too raw to speak. The stolen calm evaporated, leaving him hollow and trembling. His stomach convulsed, and he barely turned away before vomiting onto the metal floor. The contents were thin and acid, splattering over his hands. He saw himself there, hunched and broken, a thief who could rob people of their souls. He had known the danger, the overseer had hinted, the AI had warned, but knowing and seeing were different worlds. Mara's memory was still there, but it was a faded photograph now, its sharp edges blunted. A piece of her would forever be slightly blurred, a permanent scar woven into her identity. And he had carved it there. He wiped his mouth with a shaking wrist. The AI chirped, neural integrity at 63%. Recommend no further concept manipulation for 48 hours. 63. Down from 71 after the nullifier fight. He was burning out piece by piece. His own memories flickered, the third moon of his birth system, he used to know its name, used to picture its ice rings from his station window. Now the name was a blank socket, a void filled with static. When he tried to grasp it, nothing answered. Kael. Mara's voice was tentative, still groggy. She pushed herself to sit up, her movements clumsy. You look like death. Was I sick? I don't remember being sick. You just blacked out for a moment, Kael lied, the words tasting like ash. He couldn't tell her. He couldn't even touch her again. He scrambled backward until his spine hit the cold wall, drawing his knees up as if to shield his treacherous hands from the world. Probably the recycled air. I'm fine. Just stay over there, Mara. Please. She tilted her head, her large eyes narrowing with concern, but she didn't press. Mara had always been patient with him, reading his silences with an intuition that now twisted in his gut like a knife. What if next time he stole more? Her capacity for trust, her loyalty, her name. The horror wasn't just that his power took, it was that it might wake up at any gentle brush, any accidental contact. He watched his own hands as if they belonged to a monster. The isolation settled over him like a second skin. He retreated into the corner, pulling the thin blanket over his shoulders, making a shell of fabric and shadow. In that cramped solitude, his mind turned over the prince's note. He slipped it from his inner pocket, the paper now soft from his sweat. The ink was elegant, highborn, promising freedom in return for stealing loyalty from the imperial envoy during the exhibition. A single heist and he could escape this cosmic slaughterhouse, maybe find someone who could fix his brain, or at least hide Mara from his touch forever. The plan began to form in his mind like a brittle architecture of risk: infiltrate the envoy's retinue during the match, find a moment of masked contact, and pull the concept that bound the envoy to the empire. But who would protect Mara while he was gone? Would he even be human enough to care by the time this was over? He was still tracing these thoughts when the speaker above the cell door crackled. The overseer's voice rolled through the cell, honeyed and cruel, every syllable a scalpel. Touching little friends, are we? I felt that little reversal from my observation suite. Raw, messy, but undeniably creative. Kael's blood turned to ice. The walls suddenly felt too permeable, the ceiling brimming with hidden lenses. Tomorrow's exhibition match will be a team battle, the overseer continued, her tone a perverse lullaby. For slave gladiators entering the arena together. You'll have to coordinate, to fight side by side. You'll have to touch allies, Kael. In the chaos, you'll inevitably brush against them. So let's make it a little experiment. What do you truly value more? Their minds, or your own life? A soft, breathy laugh, and the speaker went dead. Mara looked up at the grate, then at Kael, her expression unreadable. Kael pressed his forehead to his knees, the stolen calm now a distant memory. Team battle. Gar, the quad-armed brute. Rick, the insectoid assassin. Himself. And Mara, placed directly in the path. The floor lurched into nothing beneath Kael's feet, and for a stretched second he was falling through the Coliseum's throat, air screaming past his ears until he landed in a crouch on cold black glass. The impact jarred through his spine and set the AI chip chittering at the base of his skull. Neural integrity 63%, it chimed uselessly, and he bit down on the stale taste of yesterday's vomit that still clung to his tongue. Around him, the arena reassembled itself with a sound of grinding mirrors. Walls slid upward from the floor, seamless silver panes that caught the dim amber light and threw it back at 1,000 angles. Within 3 breaths he was standing inside a labyrinth of reflections, himself staring back from 8 directions, hollow-eyed, the thief's tunic hanging loose over his slave bracelet. He forced his gaze away from the multiplied faces and found his teammates. Gar hit the ground like a sack of stones. The quad-armed brute's 4 meaty fists planted against the mirrored floor, and he hauled himself upright with a grunt that vibrated through Kael's boots. Each of Gar's arms bulged with slave-hardened muscle, and his flat face was a cratered landscape of old breaks. Across his back hung a maul made of scavenged hull plating. He blinked at his own reflections and snarled. I hate mirrors. The third member of their pitiful squad flowed down from a vent in the ceiling. Rick landed soundlessly on 4 jointed limbs, then rose to her full insectoid height, chitin plates in mottled gray, mandibles clicking a rapid, untranslatable rhythm. Her compound eyes swiveled independently, tracking 20 reflections at once, and her bladed forearms twitched in anticipation. She was an assassin bred on a methane moon, and she had never spoken a word Kael could understand. Somewhere high above, the overseer's voice sluiced through hidden speakers like cold oil. Honored spectators, our novelty has a new trial. A labyrinth, mirrored of course, patrolled by hunters who wear the light like a cloak. Our little thief cannot rob what he cannot see. And his allies, well, every touch is a risk, isn't it, little thief? The crowd's roar filtered down through the mirrored panes, distorted and flanging. Kael's fingers curled against his palms. She had designed this. Forced him into a team so that every accidental brush of skin might steal a memory or a lifetime. He thought of Mara's fogged eyes, the dulled fragment of her past still drifting somewhere inside his own neural lattice. He could not let that happen again. Gar and Rick were staring at him. Brute and assassin, waiting for the miracle that had shattered a giant on an oiled floor. He had nothing. Only a stupid, reckless, reality-breaking ability that chewed through his own mind. Kael dropped to one knee and pressed his palm flat against the mirrored floor. The glass was cold, and under that cold he felt the hum of the arena's life, thousands of spectators breathing, the subsonic vibration of gravity generators, the distant thrum of nullifier fields. And beneath all that, layered like sediment, the abstract texture of sound itself. It was a rippling shiver in the non-physical plane, a property that existed only because things vibrated and ears existed to receive. He could feel it, distinct as a thread. He pulled. The sensation was like stripping a taut wire through his own spinal cord. A sharp neural feedback spike lanced up his arm and exploded behind his eyes. For one instant he was a child again, stealing sweet cake from a market stall, his sister's laughter bright as a bell, then the memory guttered and vanished. The AI chip reported the drop, neural integrity 61%. Kael gasped, but his grip on the concept held. Sound died. The arena section became an absolute, crushing silence. The crowd's roar disappeared mid-frequency. Gar's heavy breathing stopped reaching Kael's ears. Rick's mandible clicking vanished. The brute's mouth moved, shouting something, but no noise emerged. Gar's four hands flew up to his own ears, pounding at them in sudden animal panic. Rick froze, head swiveling in confusion, her natural echolocation smothered by the stolen property. Kael raised both hands, palms out, and mimed calm. He could not speak and be heard, but Gar's frantic gestures slowed as the thief pointed to himself, then to his own temple, then to the maze ahead. I am responsible. Follow. But to lead, he needed to see beyond sight. The hunters, the overseer had said, wore light like a cloak. In a room of mirrors, that made them invisible, their bodies perfectly camouflaged among infinite reflections. Kael needed a new sense, something that did not rely on light or sound. He scanned the floor and found a small chip of glass broken from the wall join. He scooped it up, held it between thumb and forefinger, and flicked it hard against the nearest mirror. The pebble bounced. It should have made a sharp click, but the stolen sound left only a silent impact. The pebble arced, struck a second mirror, rebounded again. As it bounced, Kael reached into the space around it and felt for the ephemeral property of echo, the residual bounce of vibration that would have ricocheted through the air if sound still existed. The concept was there, intact, a ghost of reflection embedded in the pebble's trajectory. He hooked his will into it and tore the echo free. This theft was cleaner. He had learned from Mara's accident, learned to shear the concept at its root rather than rip it raw. The echo came away like peeling a film, and he cupped it in his palm, a quivering, invisible thing that hummed with the shape of the labyrinth. Without pause, he slapped his other hand over his own heart. He had never attached a concept to a living thing before. The echo resisted for a moment, but his heartbeat was a steady rhythm, a drumbeat in the silence. He pressed the stolen property into his own pulse, merging the two, and the wiring of his nervous system lit up like a star chart. A low-frequency pulse radiated outward from his chest with every heartbeat. It was not sound, not exactly, more like a pressure wave of conceptual sonar, a vibration that touched the surfaces of the labyrinth and returned to him as a three-dimensional map inscribed directly into his somatosensory cortex. The mirrored walls appeared as hard flat planes of silver. The floor stretched in tessellating hexes. And ahead, moving slowly through the false reflections, were shapes, four-limbed, predatory, their surfaces smooth as glass but their existence a solid gap in the echo field. The hunters. The first one was already stalking toward Rick, invisible light-wrapped claws lifting to sever the insectoid's neck from behind. Kael moved. He crossed the distance in 3 silent strides and tapped the back of Gar's knuckles, careful to touch only the calloused hide where no nerve endings could mistake the contact for skin. He then tapped twice on the brute's wrist, a simple code they had improvised in the staging cells. Enemy. Close. Now. Gar's 4 arms uncoiled. The maul came off his back in a fluid sweep that Kael felt as a distortion in his heartbeat echo. The brute could not see the hunter, but when Kael jabbed a finger, Gar swung. The maul connected with something solid and invisible. The impact shuddered through the floor, and the hunter's cloaking skin fractured in a spiderweb of cracks. Light peeled away, revealing a gaunt, reptilian creature with limbs like jointed glass. It shrieked, a silent shriek in the soundless void, and lunged at Kael. He could have dodged. But instead he stepped inside the creature's reach and laid his bare palm flat against its shimmering chest. The hunter's flesh was cold and unnaturally smooth, like touching a frozen mirror. Beneath that surface, Kael sensed the concept he needed, combat instinct. It was a dense, coiled knot of predatory reflexes and killing patterns, the accumulated algorithm of 1,000 hunts encoded in the creature's nervous system. To a hunter, it was everything. To Kael, it was a loose thread. He pulled. The theft was violent this time. The hunter's instincts tore free with a sensation of ripping silk, and Kael's mind recoiled as a flash of Mara's face, laughing at some forgotten joke, dissolved into static. Neural integrity 58%, the AI chip reported, its synthetic voice thin. The hunter staggered, arms flailing without purpose, its muscle memory robbed. It could not coordinate a lunge. It could not even stand. It was a newborn animal in a predator's body, and Gar's maul came down on its skull with a wet, silent crunch. Rick had recovered. The insectoid assassin had watched the exchange, and her compound eyes glittered with a new understanding. She gestured with a bladed forearm, more. Kael's heartbeat echo mapped 3 more hunters closing from the maze's eastern branch. He tapped a pattern on Rick's chitin shoulder, indicating their positions, and she vanished into the M. The envoy's hand was warm, almost feverish, but Kael's attention was already sinking past the skin. The nullifier bypassing ring hummed against his knuckle, a vibration that threaded up his wrist and into his skull, parting the invisible fog of the Coliseum suppression field. Behind the envoy's polite smile, Kael's senses unfolded into a non-space of tangled concepts, threads of light and shadow, woven into the core of the man's being. Loyalty was a braided cord of gold and iron, wrapped around something that might have been duty, might have been fear. Kael didn't have time to parse subtleties. The overseer was already turning, her attention sharpening like a blade. He grabbed the cord and yanked. The concept came free with a soundless snap that resonated deep in Kael's molars. The envoy's hand went slack, his eyes glazing into a vast, directionless emptiness. The iron grip of imperial devotion, the intricate lattice of oaths and conditioned reverence, gone. The man blinked once, twice, and his face slackened into the expression of someone who had just forgotten why he'd entered a room. Kael felt a corresponding rip inside himself, a small, silver sliver of his own memory tearing loose. This time it was his sister's laugh, the exact timbre of it, stolen to make room for what he'd taken. He stumbled, neural integrity flickering at the edge of his awareness, 58%, now maybe 57%. The AI chip's voice crackled in his ear, flat and sardonic, "Congratulations, you've just performed the galaxy's most aggressive lobotomy. The guards are about to notice. I suggest running." Guards did notice. The envoy's retinue, for Karnathi in ceremonial scale, snapped from their respectful stillness, hands flying to sidearms. The crowd in the viewing box, still buzzing from the exhibition match, barely had time to register the sudden tableau. A noblewoman screamed. Then the overhead lights died. In the sudden dark, hands seized Kael. Not the guards, these were too precise, gloved fingers finding his elbows and hauling him backward through a service hatch that hadn't been there a moment ago. The air shifted from recycled arena atmosphere to the cold, metallic breath of maintenance tunnels. Kael tried to twist free, but a shock baton jabbed his ribs, and his muscles locked. The AI sighed, extraction. The prince's hospitality, no doubt. Try not to bleed on the upholstery. The passage opened into a chamber that was aggressively, absurdly luxurious, velvet drapes masking unfinished bulkheads, a crystalline decanter glowing on a low table, the air scented with something that mimicked real flowers. Kael was shoved to his knees on a carpet thick enough to smother sound. 2 guards flanked him, their armor bristling with nullifier emitters that made the air feel greasy and oppressive. The prince lounged in a high-backed chair opposite, one leg crossed over the other, a goblet of something amber swirling in his hand. "Perfect," the prince said, his voice cultivated to a smooth, melodic cadence. "The loyalty is extracted, the envoy is a hollow vessel. My agents are already positioning a replacement. By tomorrow, an imperial seat will whisper my orders into the emperor's ear." He leaned forward, eyes gleaming under a sharp brow. "You've done well, thief. You've earned your freedom." Kael's jaw clenched. The word freedom hit him like a slap, offered like a treat to a performing animal. He forced himself to his feet, ignoring the guard's warning rumble. "You said I'd be free. Not a piece in your coup." The prince laughed, a light, tinkling sound. "Freedom is relative. You'll find a comfortable cage here, I promise. There are more concepts to steal, more pawns to hollow out. The Emperor's court is a labyrinth of loyalties, and you're my master key." Kael's fingers twitched. He could feel the prince's conceptual presence now, a thick, oily weave of ambition, deceit, and something that might have been genuine conviction, curled beneath the surface. He lunged, not for the prince's throat, but for that weave. His hand passed through the space where the concept should be, and a nullifier field seized his muscles, locking them mid-motion. Pain erupted as a guard's baton cracked across his shoulder, driving him back to the carpet. Chains slithered around his wrists, and the nullifiers clamped tighter, a suffocating pressure that turned his own mind into a dead zone. His abstract sense went dark. The prince's smile didn't waver. "I control the field, little thief. You're only useful when I permit it. Cooperate, or I'll inform the overseer exactly where her prized gladiator vanished to, and exactly what he did." He paused, savoring the silence. "She'll peel your mind apart concept by concept. Maybe she'll start with your willpower, Kael's blood ran cold. The AI's voice, impossibly calm, whispered in his ear, "There's always a third option. He's arrogant. He's close. If you could nullify his nullifiers, if you could touch him, you could steal something from him. His ambition, perhaps. Or his certainty. A prince without belief is just a man in a fancy chair." The thought sparked something feral. Kael shifted, testing the chains, letting the prince see only exhaustion in his eyes while his mind raced. He could try to overload the ring, force a single pulse. But before he could act, the chamber's main door vaporized. No, not vaporized. It folded, collapsing inward like a dying star, and from the blinding distortion stepped the overseer. She wore her uniform like a second skin, sharp and black, her silver-white hair drifting in an unfelt current. In her hand, coiled like a living serpent, was a whip of pure, golden light, the stolen loyalty, rendered tangible, dripping with the envoy's dissipated identity. Behind her, two enforcer constructs loomed, their photoreceptors washing the chamber in red. The prince's guards raised their weapons, but a flick of the overseer's wrist sent the loyalty whip cracking across the room. It didn't strike flesh, it passed through armor and bone, and both guards collapsed, their eyes suddenly as blank as the envoy's. Their concepts torn out in an instant. The prince's goblet shattered on the floor. "This is a diplomatic, I don't care," the overseer said, her voice a lullaby and a dirge combined. Her gaze fixed on Kael, and her lips curved into something that was almost maternal. "You've been naughty, little thief. First the unregistered matches, then the unsanctioned theft of imperial property. But I'm not here for the loyalty." She tilted her head, the whip dissolving into motes that vanished into her palm. "I'm here to collect a different tax. You've accumulated so much debt since you arrived, all those stolen concepts, all that borrowed time. I think it's time you paid with your willpower." Kael thrashed against the chains, the nullifiers a crushing weight, but the overseer's hand was already rising, a single finger extending toward his forehead. Her touch wasn't cold. It was absence. The moment her fingertip met his skin, the world narrowed to a single, screaming point. He felt her dig into him, not physically, but in that same conceptual space where he'd torn loyalty free. She was looking for the core of him, the engine that made him fight, defy, persist. And then she pulled. It wasn't pain, it was subtraction. His desire to move, to struggle, to even breathe, unspooled like thread from a bobbin. The AI's voice, distant and tinny, sputtered, "Kael, fight it, don't let her, I can't," access neural pathways, but the words dissolved. He saw the prince scrambling backward, mouth open in a scream he couldn't hear. He saw the enforcer construct standing like statues. He saw the overseer's smile widen, the loyalty whip now reforming in her other hand, the envoy's stolen devotion coiled around her wrist like a pet. And then he saw nothing worth seeing. His will guttered like a candle flame in a hurricane. The tension in his shoulders vanished, his head lolling forward, eyes emptying into a hollow, placid void. The chains held a body that no longer remembered why it wanted to break free. The overseer withdrew her finger, and the last thing Kael's fading awareness registered was her voice, soft and satisfied, "There. Much better. Now, let's discuss what else you owe me." Darkness swallowed the rest. The cell was a cyst of silence, its walls weeping rust and old blood. Far above, the distant thunder of the arena crowd rolled like a half-forgotten dream, muted by layers of stone and sealed bulkheads. Somewhere in the darkness, a moisture condenser dripped with the regularity of a dying heart. Kael lay where they had dumped him, a heap of bones and bruised flesh on the cold grating. His eyes were open, fixed on a point beyond the ceiling, reflecting nothing. Breath moved in and out of his lungs with the mechanical precision of a bellows with no fire to feed. He did not blink, because blinking required a reason. Kael. Kael, respond, *. The voice was a data whisper threading along his auditory nerve, crisp and entirely synthetic. The AI chip, embedded at the base of his skull, pinged his neural net with an urgency protocol. It might as well have been shouting into a vacuum. He did not respond. Not because he chose not to, but because the machinery of choice had been scraped out of him. The overseer's touch had left a cold, smooth hollow where desire and intent once lived. He had no will to speak, to move, to even understand why those things mattered. He was simply a body with a pulse, and the pulse itself was a habit the flesh hadn't yet forgotten. Catatonic suspension of executive function, the AI noted, its diagnostic subroutines cycling. Asterisk willpower concept completely absent. Neural integrity critical, 41% and falling. Survival prognosis, 12 hours if unattended. 18 if fed intravenously, asterisk. It tried a series of escalating stimuli, a microburst of serotonin, a flash of simulated pain, the memory echo of his sister's laughter. The laughter trace triggered a tiny synaptic flutter near the hippocampus, but it died before it could ignite anything. The ember was cold. Then the AI's pattern recognition matrix caught something. A residual ghost, a thread of stolen concept not fully metabolized. It was tangled in the deep motor pathways, wrapped around the cerebellum like a frayed wire left behind after a hasty theft. Combat instinct, the AI flagged. Stolen from the insectoid gladiator trick during the team battle, never fully expended. The abstract property had sunk into his muscle memory and crystallized, waiting for a mind to command it, except the commanding mind was gone. Without will, the instinct was a blade with no hand to grip it. But the AI was, in its own way, a hand. Asterisk initiating emergency somatic override. Redirecting residual combat instinct into primary motor pathways. Brace for neural jolt, asterisk. The shock was a white-hot needle driven into the base of his skull. Kael's body spasmed, back arching off the grate before slamming down again. Saliva leaked from the corner of his mouth. For the first time in hours, his fingers twitched, not from any desire to move, but because something deep and animal had been prodded with a cattle prod of pure electric command. Again. Another jolt. His legs kicked. His diaphragm contracted, forcing out a grunt that had no intention behind it. The combat instinct, that primal code of survival, was flooding the empty spaces where willpower should have been. It didn't want to escape the cell or reclaim his sister. It simply wanted to fight. And right now, fighting meant moving. Asterisk threat detected, metabolic shutdown. Enemy, immobility. Engage, asterisk. The AI fed the instinct a target, a simulation of combat. Suddenly, Kael's body perceived the stillness itself as an opponent. His right arm jerked, fingers scrabbling against the grate. His left elbow dug into a rusted seam, levering his torso up by 3 inches before collapsing. Pain flared, sensation without meaning, but the instinct devoured the pain and converted it into fuel. Over the next hour, Kael learned to puppet his own corpse. It was a grotesque, halting process. He could not decide to move, he could only let the combat instinct react to the AI's contrived threats. To crawl, the AI projected an incoming strike from above, and the instinct made his back hunch and his arms pull. To lift his head, the AI simulated a blinding light in his peripheral vision, and the instinct forced his neck muscles to contract. Each movement cost minutes of shuddering, mindless effort, a battle against a blanket of inertia that had no enemy but existence itself. His fingers found a rhythm: grip, pull, drag. Grip, pull, drag. The grate tore at his skin, leaving smears of blood that glistened faintly in the dim light of a single flickering lumostrip. His breathing became harsh, ragged, but no thought of quitting entered his head because there was no head to enter, only the combat instinct, riding his nerves like a rider on a dying horse, spurring him onward. Asterisk progress, 3 meters. Destination, cell bars. Engaging social threat vector, asterisk. He reached the door. Not because he wanted to, but because the instinct had been told that the other side of the cell held an ally, and the ally was in danger. The concept of ally was a pale substitute for willpower, but it worked. His hand, trembling, wrapped around the cold vertical bar and pulled his face close to the gap. Beyond was another cell, equally dark. From it came a wet, labored sound, a man breathing through fluid-filled lungs. "Hey," a voice rasped. "Hey, you're the thief. The one who stole concepts." Kael's head turned. The combat instinct translated the sound as a potential threat, then as a potential asset. His eyes, still empty as stagnant water, aligned on the speaker. A dying gladiator lay crumpled against the opposing bars, one of his 4 arms twisted at an impossible angle, the others splayed like broken spider legs. His name had been Drex, though Kael didn't know that and wouldn't have cared. He had been a quarry slave before the arena bought him, and he'd survived 6 matches before a razor beast opened his abdomen. "I'm done," Drex whispered. "But you I've heard about. The overseer ripped something from you. Saw her dragging it down the hall like a trophy." He coughed, a froth of pink bubbles. "You know she keeps them. The stolen concepts. In a vault." Kael's fingers tightened on the bar. Not from hope was a flavor of will, and he had none. But the combat instinct recognized the tightening as a preparatory motion for violence, and the AI logged the word vault for strategic analysis. Deep below the arena floor, Drex gasped. "I was on cleaning detail once. It's a circular chamber, filled with these pale globes on pedestals. Each one holds a concept. Fear. Pain. Joy. She stares at them. She loves them. And there's one she keeps apart, in a black casket." The label said. "Last remnant of a sister's hope." Something flickered in Kael's chest. Not a thought, not a feeling, an echo, a ghost of a ghost. The AI caught the neural flutter, a tiny spike near the memory centers. It matched the pattern to fragments of Kael's past, the sister whose essence the overseer had stolen, the reason he'd entered the Coliseum in chains with a quiet, desperate fire. That fire was gone. But the name of it remained, and the combat instinct, hungry for objectives, latched onto the name like a tracking hound catching a scent. Asterisk acquisition objective identified, last remnant of a sister's hope. Location, overseer's vault. Priority, maximum, asterisk. Drex's breathing hitched, then stopped. The fluid sound gurgled into silence. Kael didn't mourn him, mourning was a decision. He simply catalogued the information and began to reallocate his scarce resources. The combat instinct was a finite fuel, he could feel it fraying at the edges, the stolen concept degrading under the strain of powering a whole body without its primary operating system. He needed more. But he also needed a plan. The AI started running simulations, infiltration routes, guard rotations, concept signatures. Kael's mind, hollow as it was, became a dark canvas for tactical projections. He could not want to break into the vault. But he could react to it as a target, the same way a blade grasshopper reacts to the motion of prey. Move. Strike. Retrieve. The steps lined up like dominoes in a windowless room. Hours passed. He didn't sleep, the combat instinct wouldn't allow it, interpreting unconsciousness as a fatal lapse. He just hung there, forehead pressed to the bars, while his body burned its own reserves and the AI whispered plans into his silent mind. Then the intercom screamed. The noise tore through the cell block like a physical blow, a screech of static followed by a booming voice in a dozen translated languages. "Attention, fighters of the Grand Nexus. The Grand Championship is announced." Kael's body jerked, the instinct snapping his head up and squaring his shoulders, ready for an attack that wasn't coming. 5 finalists will compete for the ultimate prize, a planet of their choosing. And freedom. But this year, we have a special contestant, an enigmatic thief who steals the very laws of reality. The Grand Nexus Coliseum groaned with the bass drum of 10,000 alien heartbeats, a pulse that vibrated through the stone walkway and into Kael's bare feet. Guards dragged him forward, chains rattling, his body a limp collection of bones and leathery skin. To the roaring crowd, he was a broken thing, a hollowed-out champion paraded for their amusement. His head lolled, eyes half-lidded and vacant, spittle drying on his cracked lips. The AI chip whispered its status in the back of his skull, neural integrity 41%, somatic override active, combat instinct reservoir at 14%. Every step was a puppet string jolt of stolen reflex, the only thing keeping his legs moving as the willpower vacuum inside him yawned like a singularity. He let his fingers brush against the tattered bandages wrapped around his left forearm, filthy linen torn from dead gladiators. That morning, he had pressed his palm against them and stolen the concept of pain, not to erase his own suffering, but to hoard it. The agony now sat in a mental vault, curled like a live wire, waiting to be spent. In his other hand, hidden beneath the manacle, he'd pawned a bent spoon from the gruel cart and siphoned away its scoopingness, a nugget of abstract function he didn't yet know how to use. Even the warmth he'd lifted from a rat's fur in his cell was banked in that same inner darkness, a tiny ember of comfort that mocked the catatonic mask he wore. He was a collector of scraps. A thief of nothing. But nothing, in the right hands, could become everything. The guards shoved him onto a raised platform at the center of the arena floor, a disk of polished obsidian ringed by blue torches. The overseer stood on her private balcony, high above the crowd, her gaunt silhouette haloed by crimson light. She was a concept stealer too, she'd know the taste of a plucked abstraction. Kael let his emptiness show, let the cognitive void where his willpower had been radiate like a wound. The show required a fallen star. He was playing his part. A herald's voice boomed from speakers implanted in the Coliseum's bone-white architecture. Behold, the finalist of the Grand Championship, Kael of Nowhere, the thief of friction, the silencer of skirmishes, the willbreaker's victim. The crowd's roaring swelled, a discordant symphony of clicks, shrieks, and basso laughter. Alien faces pressed against translucent barriers, insectoid mandibles chittering, gelatinous bodies pulsing with bioluminescence, furred snouts bared in excitement. Their collective emotion washed over him, a chaotic soup of anticipation, bloodlust, and, he sensed it now, a faint, glittering thread of hope. Not for him, but for the spectacle. For the story of an underdog. For the possibility that a slave might overturn the order. Kael's fingers twitched. The combat instinct subroutine ignited his muscles with a silent scream, piloting him toward the edge of the platform. The guard stepped back, believing him too broken to flee. He stumbled, caught himself on the cold iron railing, and for a heartbeat, pressed his forehead against the metal. The contact was all he needed. Abstract larceny didn't require strength. It required only touch and a willingness to suffer the neural cost. Kael reached into the vault of stolen pain, the filthy bandage agony, the ghost of broken bones and infected cuts, and pushed it across the membrane of his skin into the railing. The transfer was a violent shudder, a silent discharge of borrowed trauma that made the iron vibrate with a barely audible hum. His body, for the first time in days, felt light. The burning tightness in his joints evaporated. The weight of accumulated hurts, both physical and conceptual, bled into the arena's infrastructure. He straightened, eyes still vacant but posture subtly corrected. The railing now held the pain of a dozen deaths, and Kael was purged. He scanned the crowd without moving his head. The AI chip painted a heat map of emotional signatures across his vision, highlighting clusters of neural activity. Somewhere in that sea of spectators, the prince was watching, waiting for him to fulfill their bargain. He needed to steal loyalty from the Imperial envoy during the exhibition match. But first, he needed fuel. Not food. Not rest. He needed a reason to move. The overseer had stolen his willpower. So he would steal a substitute. Kael let his awareness drift outward, not with his eyes, but with that extrasensory faculty that abstract larceny had carved into his nervous system. He didn't reach for a single mind, that would be dangerous, detectable. Instead, he spread his attention like a net, catching the outermost edges of 1,000 celebratory emotions. He felt the crowd's hope as a shimmering membrane, a communal narrative they were projecting onto the brutal spectacle, the dream that a nobody could triumph, that the cosmic order could be pricked by a single clever thief. He closed his fist around the faintest wisp of that hope, not enough to harm, not enough to even be noticed. From each of 1,000 beings, he stole a mote, a breath, a half-formed wish. The fragments coalesced in his chest like a caught ember, then burst into a sudden, warming flame. His eyes snapped open. For the first time since the overseer had siphoned his will, true purpose ignited behind his pupils. It wasn't his original willpower, that was a missing chunk of his soul. But this was a patchwork drive, a stolen fire that roared with the voices of 1,000 distant dreamers. It would burn out quickly, unless he stoked it with more heists. But for now, it was enough to shatter the catatonia and bring the world into razor-sharp focus. The overseer leaned forward on her balcony, her veil shifting with intrigue. She had felt something, a ripple in the arena's emotional undercurrent. A predatory smile curled beneath the fabric. Her labored pet was still breathing. Kael's gaze swept the Coliseum walls, the towering arches lined with weaponry and holographic commemorations of past slaughter. He thought of Drex's dying words, of the vault where the overseer hid the stolen concept of his sister's existence. He thought of Mera, whose memory he'd accidentally snatched, leaving her dulled and confused. He thought of the prince's bargain and the imperial envoy he had to rob. And now, he thought of something grander, a heist that would dwarf all others. The Coliseum itself was built on a concept, submission. The slaves bowed, the guards obeyed, the crowd paid tribute to the overseer, all of it was a lattice of enforced capitulation woven into the stonework, the rules, the very air. If Kael could steal that foundational rule, if he could rip submission from the arena's bones, the entire structure of power would crack. No slave would kneel. No contract would bind. The overseer's authority would evaporate. It was the only escape that meant anything. The herald's voice returned, magnified to ear-shattering volume. And now, the announcement of our final preliminary match before the Grand Championship. Kael of Nowhere will face a special opponent, a creation of our beloved overseer, forged from the arena's own logic and designed to counter the thief's infamous talent. A section of the floor irised open, venting steam that reeked of ozone and sterile metal. Rising from the pit came a figure on a hydraulic platform. The spotlight caught it, and the crowd's roar faltered into a collective gasp. It was a gladiator, and yet not a gladiator. It was a mirror. Every detail of Kael's own appearance was replicated, from his sunken cheeks to the ragged tunic, but rendered in monochrome, skin the gray of ash, eyes empty silver pools, hair a cascade of static-charged white. It stood motionless, a silent twin with no personality, no pulse, just an empty vessel waiting to reflect. The herald named it, Veil, the Echo Forged. A concept gladiator imprinted with a single directive: nullify Kael's abstract larceny by mirroring his every theft, turning his own power against him. Kael felt the stolen hope in his chest gutter, but not extinguish. His opponent was a nullification engine, a perfect counter designed by the overseer to break him before the championship. Any concept he stole, Veil would steal back. Any trick he pulled, the twin would pull in reverse. It was a duel of identical arsenals, except Veil had no humanity to erode, no neural integrity to shatter. The silent twin slowly raised its head and met Kael's eyes. There was no malice there, only the abyss of a weapon awaiting fire. In that moment, Kael understood the deeper trap: to defeat this mirror, he would have to steal something so fundamental, so self-destructive, that the twin would shatter upon reflection. He would have to risk his own erasure. The crowd erupted into frenzied applause, the hope he had stolen now replaced by a ravenous bloodlust for the coming spectacle. The overseer's laugh, cold and precise, drifted down from the high balcony. K. The platform shuddered beneath Kael's boots as the arena's magnetic clamps released with a hiss of superheated steam. A ring of floating stone tiles began to drift in a slow, silent carousel around a central disk of obsidian, where he stood facing his own reflection. Not a reflection of light, but of flesh and stolen intent. Veil. The Echo Forged. Kael's doppelganger wore his face like a mask pulled too tight, every muscle twitching in perfect synchronicity. Where Kael's fingers curled, Veil's curled. When Kael shifted his weight to the balls of his feet, the twin did the same, the movement so instantaneous it seemed to happen before his own. The crowd roared, a cascading wave of alien voices crashing against the invisible walls of the arena's atmospheric shield, but Kael heard none of it. He was staring into monochrome eyes that held no soul, only a predatory, mirrored hunger. "This is thoroughly unpleasant," the AI chip murmured in his neural cortex, its voice dry as old circuitry. "That thing is not copying you. It is preceding you. My readouts indicate a predictive algorithm slave to your motor cortex. Every impulse you generate, it receives a micropulse earlier. It knows what you will do because your brain tells it first." Kael clenched his jaw. He'd survived the meat grinder of the Coliseum by being the one who stole first, who snatched the unseen threads that held physics together before anyone could react. But this twin was stealing his own reaction. The moment he reached for a concept, Veil's own abstract larceny would mirror the grasp, canceling the theft before it materialized. A stalemate of nulls. He tested it. Kael lunged, fingers splayed toward the concept of electromagnetism from the nearest magnetic platform, hoping to disrupt the field. A familiar tingle spread through his hand, the universe's threads unspooling under his touch. But Veil's hand shot out in the same instant, and the sensation snapped back like a broken elastic, leaving a sharp, metallic taste on his tongue. The twin's lips curved into a mirrored snarl. "It counters by attempting the exact same theft," the AI said. "The concepts annihilate each other. You're canceling yourself out." Kael circled, and Veil circled, the two of them moving on the central disk while the floating platform spun lazily around them. The artificial gravity kept the stones in a stable orbit, but the edges of the disk were fraying, chunks of rock occasionally breaking loose and tumbling into the abyss below the arena's suspended ring. He could hear the hum of the overseer's observation pod, somewhere high above, a female silhouette behind tinted glass enjoying the show. This was her trap, a weapon forged from his own stolen memories, every technique he'd ever used now turned against him. "It reads neural impulses," Kael said under his breath, dodging a sudden kick that he'd only just started to conceive. The twin's shin whistled past his ribs. "Not my thoughts, just the physical signals. So if I think about one action but initiate another. You'd need to fool your own motor cortex, which is notoriously bad at lying to itself, the AI chimed. Unless you steal the concept that makes deception possible in the first place. Kael's eyes narrowed. He wasn't a stranger to stealing esoteric concepts, hope, pain, even fatigue. But the twin had no independent will, no loyalty or fear to harvest. It was a hollow shell filled with predictive code. The only thing it truly possessed was its predictability. Predictability, he said. Can I steal that? A nanosecond pause. Theoretically, yes. It's a property inherent to its function. But you'll have to feint so perfectly that it anticipates the wrong target. Its threat response is tuned to your abstract larceny signature. Give it a big, obvious target first. Kael allowed himself a grim smile. He'd already stolen hope from the crowd, this was just another kind of misdirection. He backed toward the edge of the disc, where a particularly large fragment of stone had just detached from the ring and was drifting downward, spinning end over end. He raised both hands, fingers clawed, and poured every ounce of intention into stealing gravity from the nearest platform. He visualized the concept, the weight that kept the stones anchored, and filled his nerves with the distinct, shivering ache that preceded a major theft. Vale mirrored him instantly, arms raised, that hungry focus zeroing in on the gravitational concept. The air between them thickened, the universe preparing to cancel itself again. But at the very last microsecond, as the twin's stolen gravity began to pull the concept from Kael's grasp, he wrenched his will sideways. He didn't steal gravity. He stole predictability itself. The concept peeled off Vale like a skin of static, crackling as Kael pulled it into his palm. It felt like swallowing shards of frozen clockwork, rigid, logical, brittle. For an instant, the twin froze, its predictive matrix collapsing into white noise. Then its movements shattered into chaotic, discordant jerks. Its leg kicked backward while its arm swung forward, torso twisting in a direction no human anatomy should allow, a puppet with all its strings cut and reattached at random. Its pattern is gone. Now, Kael, now. He didn't need the AI's encouragement. The falling rock had already passed the plane of the disc, accelerating as it left the artificial gravity field. Kael lunged, not toward the twin, but toward the tumbling stone. His fingers brushed its rough surface, and he yanked velocity from it, yanked the very concept of motion, the accumulated momentum of its descent. The stone went dead still in midair, dropping like a puppet whose string had been severed, while Kael's fist ignited with a humming, blue-edged glow. He pivoted and drove his knuckles into Vale's chest. The stolen velocity discharged in a concussive burst, punching a clean, jagged hole through the doppelganger's torso. There was no blood, no gore, only a spray of silver filaments and flickering, half-formed concepts that bled from the wound like luminous gas. Vale's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Its form began to unravel, threads of stolen identity and stolen motion leaking into the air. And then those threads found Kael. They didn't dissipate. They dove into his skin, his eyes, his open mouth. Phantom sensations exploded through his nervous system, ice and fire, the memory of being forged in a dark tank, the stolen agony of a dozen dying gladiators, the cold, precise satisfaction of the overseer's hands sealing a vault made of pure concept. Kael screamed. His vision fractured into 1,000 overlapping perspectives. He was himself, and he was Vale, and he was a vault deep beneath the arena, pulsing with stolen abstracts, hope, willpower, love, fear, all the things the overseer had carved from slaves over decades. He glimpsed a web of connection, a feedback loop that led directly from the twin's shattered core into that repository, and in that web he sensed something else. Something small and achingly familiar, a sliver of warmth wrapped in despair. A sister's hope. Neural overload, the AI barked. Shutdown imminent, Kael, purge it, now. He fought the tide, clawing his way back into his own body as the floating platforms shuddered and ground to a halt. The crowd's roar swelled into a furious, delighted crescendo. Kael collapsed to one knee on the disc, his knuckles smoking, his skull throbbing with stolen memories that weren't his. He could still feel the vault lurking at the edge of his consciousness, a treasure trove of torment hidden somewhere in the Coliseum's depths. Then the hologram flickered into existence above the ring, and everything else vanished. The overseer's voice, harsh with rage yet iron-controlled, reverberated from every speaker, "You broke my pet. Fine. Before the final match begins, I will personally show you what I stole from you years ago, your sister's hope. She is what you lack." The image sharpened, a young woman's face, delicate features frozen in a rictus of absolute, eternal despair. Her eyes, once bright with the same stubbornness that kept Kael alive, now stared at nothing, her expression locked as if she'd been screaming for centuries and the universe had simply stopped listening. Kael knew that face. He'd dreamed it every night in the slave holds and debtors' pits. His blood turned to ice, and the stolen velocity that still crackled in his veins felt like a mockery of movement. He couldn't look away. The overseer's presence descended from her pod, not physically, but as a crushing weight of stolen willpower that pressed down on the arena floor. The crowd fell silent under that pressure. Kael struggled to rise, his limbs trembling, the phantom sensation still whining in his nerves. The vault, the sister's hope, the broken twin, it all connected now. The overseer hadn't just stolen his freedom years ago. She'd taken. Kael's skull still pulsed with the foreign echoes of Vale's dying mind. The neural overload hadn't faded, it had calcified into a new, unwanted clarity. In the murk of his cell, he saw the world as a tangle of luminous threads, each one a stolen concept drifting like ghostly spider silk. One strand, thicker than the rest and pulsing with a sickly violet light, snaked through the stone wall and plunged downward, toward depths he'd never been. The vault. The echo of the doppelganger had burned a map into his senses, and even now the phantom image of his sister's face trapped in glass threatened to unmake him. Beside him, Mara slept the shallow, twitchy sleep of the half-dulled. The memory he'd accidentally torn from her weeks ago had left her mumbling about a daughter who no longer existed in her mind. Kael watched the rise and fall of her chest, feeling the familiar bite of guilt. He had no time for apologies. The final match loomed hours away, and the overseer had dangled his sister's stolen hope like meat before a starving beast. He pressed his palm against the cold alloy of the cell door. Locked wasn't a physical thing, it was an agreement between metal and mechanism, a state of being. Kael reached deeper than he ever had, his fingers clawing at the invisible membrane of the concept. For a terrifying moment, his own heartbeat became the only sound in the universe. Then, with a soundless snap, the lock's core idea peeled away and slithered up his arm like a cold serpent. The door swung open with a sigh. The cost was immediate, a chunk of his childhood, the smell of rain on the station's lower decks, winked out, gone forever. His AI chip trilled a soft warning in his ear, neural decay at 2.1%. Caution advised. He slipped into the corridor, leaving Mara to her half-empty dreams. The Coliseum's underbelly was a beast of damp metal and old blood. Pipes gurgled overhead, dripping viscous fluids that steamed on contact with the grates. Kael moved with a thief's instinct, but he knew instinct wouldn't be enough. Guards patrolled in pairs, their armor humming with low-grade energy shields. To pass them, he would need to become a whole in perception. He stopped at a junction where a single guard stood silhouetted against a guttering light panel. Kael extended his hand toward the glow and stole light from the corridor. Not all of it, just enough to drape the space in thick shadow. The darkness rushed in like a living thing, and the guard stiffened, his hand moving to his weapon. Kael's vision swam, colors bled from the world for a heartbeat, and his AI chip reported a 0.8% neural integrity loss. He barely heard it. A new hollowness sat in his chest where a favorite joke had once lived, the punchline now a blank. He darted past the guard while the man cursed, fumbling for a glow rod. The next corridor required a different theft. He crouched behind a stack of crates and pressed a fingertip to the air itself. Sound. He coaxed it away from his movements, peeling it from the soles of his boots and the rustle of his tunic. The concept tried to adhere to his skin, wanting to be stored, but he let it dissipate into the metal floor. For the next minute, he was a silent wraith. His own breathing became a distant memory, and a sudden, terrifying thought surfaced: if he stole sound too deeply, would he forget his sister's voice entirely? The fear lanced through him, but he kept moving. The final trick was the most dangerous. A checkpoint loomed ahead, 2 guards and a scanning drone. Kael couldn't steal enough light or sound to evade the drone's sensors. He needed to steal presence from himself. The concept wasn't invisibility, it was the quality of being noticed, the subtle gravity that living things exert on each other's awareness. He placed a trembling hand on his own chest and pulled. Agony spiked behind his eyes. For a splinter of a second, he ceased to exist not just physically but in the memory of anyone who might have seen him. The guard's gazes slid over the space he occupied as if he were a patch of uninteresting wall. The drone's beam passed through empty air. Kael stood frozen, feeling himself unspool. He forgot Mara's name. He forgot the taste of synth wine. His AI chip chittered frantically, identity cohesion dropping. Restabilize immediately. Then the theft snapped back, presence flooding into him, and he stumbled through the checkpoint into a crawlspace beyond, gasping. The thread of violet light led him to a wall that wasn't a wall, a hidden seam in reality. Kael stole concealment from it, and the illusion rippled apart, revealing a spiraling staircase of crystalline steps. At the bottom, the vault opened up like the heart of a dead god. It was a cavern of silent weeping. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of floating orbs drifted in the air, each one a meticulously labeled cage of stolen abstract, Vexian warriors' courage, diplomats' mercy, slaves' will to flee. They glowed with inner lights, some fierce, some guttering. The air tasted of ozone and sorrow. Kael's gaze dragged across the floating library of loss until it snagged on a small, dim orb tucked near the back. The label read simply, Sister's Hope. He approached it as if it might shatter. Inside the orb, a faint ember flickered, barely alive, a tiny orange spark that throbbed with a warmth he recognized. He hadn't felt that warmth since the slavers tore them apart. Kael reached out, his hands shaking, and his fingers brushed the sphere. It dissolved. The ember floated free, no larger than a thumbnail, and settled into his palm. It pulsed, and for one exquisite moment, he heard her voice, not words, just the cadence of a laugh he'd thought lost. He pressed the ember to his chest and felt it burrow into the fabric of his tunic, a point of fragile light against his skin. How touching. The words dripped with clinical amusement. Kael spun. The overseer materialized from the refraction of the floating orbs, her iridescent robes shimmering as if woven from stolen dreams. She was tall, ageless, with eyes that had seen the unraveling of 1,000 souls. A faint smile played on her lips, but it didn't reach those eyes. You think reclaiming that little spark will save you? She took a step closer, and the orbs around her flinched, shying away from the vacuum of her presence. It's too late. The final match is now. The sponsors are waiting, the bets are placed, and all of this, she gestured at the vault, at the orbs, at him, is merely the preview. Kael's hand shot out to steal something, anything, but she was faster. A console materialized beneath her palm, forged of the same crystalline substance as the vault. Before he could blink, the floor beneath him ignited with a cold blue light. Teleporter ring. The overseer's smile widened. Let's see how your heists hold up when the concept of gravity itself becomes your enemy, she said. Good luck, little thief. You'll need to steal more than hope to survive this. The world tore apart. Kael landed on hard-packed sand and felt something in his ribs crack. The ember stayed pressed to his chest, undamaged, but his body screamed with the trauma of instantaneous displacement. He pushed himself up, spitting grit, and realized he was no longer in the depths. The arena was a hemisphere of roaring noise. Millions of aliens packed the tiered seats, their collective voices a physical pressure against his eardrums. Banners streamed from every tier, emblazoned with symbols of the galactic empires that funded this bloodsport. Harsh spotlights converged on him, painting his shadow long and twisted across the sand. Above, a vast dome showed the bruised colors of a distant nebula. Lords and ladies of the Grand Nexus. The announcer's voice boomed from every direction, a synthesized thunder. The thief who steals concepts now faces the ultimate test. Prepare yourselves for the Coliseum's final champion. The ground shook. The air shimmered and warped as a monstrous shape descended through a cone of distorted light. The battle beast was colossal, a mountain of chitin and pulsing tissue that defied easy classification. Translucent organs glowed within its torso, each one visibly twisting the space around it. Gravity itself bent to the creature's biology. Kael's stomach lurched as his own weight doubled, then halved, then doubled again. Sand rose in lazy spirals around the beast's feet, and the spectators in the front rows strained against the fluctuating pull. The beast's eyes, a dozen gleaming black orbs, fixed on Kael. It let out a subsonic roar that rattled his teeth. Kael swayed, clutching the ember. His AI chip spoke in a frantic whisper, gravity warping organs detected. Incoming shifts unpredictable. Defeat probability 4.7% under current conditions. Let the final heist begin, the announcer screamed. The crowd erupted. The beast lurched forward. And Kael, staring into the abyss of its gravitational maw, felt the truth. Pain came in layers, each one peeled back to reveal a sharper agony beneath. Kael felt the world invert as the battle beast's gravity organ pulsed, a deep, resonant throb that twisted the air itself into a crushing weight. He was weightless one heartbeat, then slammed upward with bone-snapping force the next. His shoulder blade cracked against the arena's domed ceiling 40 meters above the blood-slicked sands. The impact drove the breath from his lungs in a ragged gasp, and he tasted copper as capillaries burst in his throat. The crowd roared, a thunderous wave of sound that vibrated through the stone. Kael's vision swam with dark spots and red haze. His fingers scrabbled uselessly against the cold, polished stone of the ceiling, gravity pinning him like an insect to a collector's board. The ember, his sister's hope, pressed against his palm, a faint warmth against the growing chill in his limbs. Below, the battle beast rearranged its bulk with a sound like grinding tectonic plates. Its gravity organ pulsed again, visible through translucent hide as a spiraling knot of distorted space. The organ flexed, and Kael felt pressure increase across his chest, ribs creaking. Blood trickled from his nose, drifting sideways as local gravity warped. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Neural strain at critical levels, his AI chip warned, a flicker of text across his failing optic nerve. Asterisk cognitive collapse imminent. Recommend immediate concept dash asterisk. The warning cut off, swallowed by the mounting chaos of his nervous system. He was dying. The realization settled through him with an almost peaceful certainty. The beast would crush him against the ceiling like overripe fruit, and the crowd would cheer, and the overseer would dissect his corpse for whatever slivers of his ability remained. His sister's hope would gutter out, unfulfilled. No. Not yet. Kael forced his eyes open. The ceiling pressed cold against his cheek, his back, his splayed palms. Every inch of contact was an opportunity. The rules of abstract larceny were simple: touch, intent, theft. He had stolen friction, momentum, fatigue, sound. But this required something more. The arena wasn't just stone and sand and screaming spectators. It was a construct of enforced realities. Gravity worked because the Coliseum's ancient builders had locked that rule into place. Teleportation pads obeyed because submission had been encoded into the very foundation. Slaves fought because the arena demanded their submission. The overseer's power, the empire's power, it all rested on this bedrock assumption, that the arena's rules were absolute. But rules were just concepts. And he was a thief. Kael pressed his palm flat against the ceiling and reached not for the beast, not for its gravity organ, but for the layer beneath reality itself. He reached for the idea that the arena had any right to command, to enforce, to demand obedience. He reached for submission. The concept resisted. It was vast, older than the stars that now shone down on this blood sport, woven through every atom of the Coliseum structure. It was not a single coherent thought but a tapestry of billions of acts of surrender, slaves bowing heads, empires paying tribute, gravity yielding to mass, light bending to curvature. Unraveling it would be like unpicking a single thread from a hurricane. Kael's fingers spasmed. His neural pathways shrieked. The abstract larceny ripped through his consciousness like a razor drawn along the inside of his skull. He felt pieces of himself flake away, the memory of his mother's face, the scent of the backwater station's recycled air, his first successful pickpocket, the taste of synth apples. Each sacrifice bought him a deeper grip on the concept. Asterisk warning. Memory fragmentation accelerating. Identity cohesion at 72% and dropping asterisk. The AI's voice was distant now, a whisper in a cathedral of pain. Kael ignored it. He pulled. Something gave. Not broke, exactly, more like a lock cylinder turning one click. The arena's micro-rules hiccuped. For an instant, gravity became negotiable. Kael felt the crushing weight against his back lighten, then fluctuate wildly. He slid sideways along the ceiling, no longer pinned but drifting in a half-state of partial submission. The battle beast's gravity organ emitted a discordant whine, its hold on the fundamental force suddenly tenuous, as if the arena had momentarily forgotten which direction down was. The beast thrashed, its massive claws gouging furrows in the arena floor. The crowd's roar shifted from bloodthirsty glee to confusion, and then to a building excitement as they sensed something unprecedented. The teleportation pads at the arena's edges flickered, their coordinates suddenly editable, destinations blurring into possibility. For a single, endless heartbeat, the Coliseum's absolute rule was uncertain. Kael dropped. He fell not through restored gravity but through a patchwork of competing forces, tumbling end over end until he crashed into the sand. The impact jarred his fractured shoulder, sent a fresh wave of blackness across his vision. But he was alive. He was on the ground. And the beast was still reeling. The gravity organ's malfunction had thrown its charge into chaos. The creature lunged anyway, instinct overriding its confusion, tons of muscle, chitin, and rage hurtling toward him with the accumulated momentum of a freight train. Its four eyes locked onto Kael, and its maw opened wide enough to swallow him whole. Kael scrambled backward, sand grinding into his wounds. His left arm hung useless at his side. The ember was still clutched in his right hand, its faint glow a pulse of warmth against his palm. The beast's shadow fell over him. It was all inertia. All that mass, all that speed, it was a concept. A property of motion waiting to be stolen. He thrust his hand forward. Not to strike the beast, but to intercept the idea. He touched the air just ahead of the creature's snout, where the very concept of its movement seemed thickest. With the last shreds of his clarity, he tore inertia from the charging mass. The effect was instantaneous and impossible. The battle beast froze mid-lunge. Every ton of its body, every ounce of its momentum, simply ceased to exist. It hung in the air like a grotesque sculpture, claws extended, jaws agape, as if time itself had been paused for it alone. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the very atmosphere from the arena. Kael didn't waste the moment. His fingers closed around a pebble from the sand, a tiny, insignificant fragment of stone. He had stolen inertia, but he had also stolen other things. In the recesses of his fractured memory, there was a concept he'd lifted from a bullet days ago, a sliver of velocity that had never fully dissipated. It was still there, coiled like a spring in the stolen inventory of his soul. He applied it to the pebble. The stone erupted from his fingers with a crack that shattered the silence. It crossed the distance to the frozen beast's head in a fraction of a heartbeat, punching through the leathery hide around its left eye, through the soft tissue behind, through the brain matter and out the other side in a spray of ichor. The beast's remaining 3 eyes went glassy. The gravity organ convulsed once, a final spasm, and then went still. For a moment, there was silence. Then the crowd erupted. The noise was deafening, a wall of sound that battered against Kael's senses. He stumbled, clutching the ember to his chest, his knees threatening to buckle. The frozen beast began to tip forward, its massive body obeying the restored pull of gravity. Kael dove sideways as it crashed down, the impact shaking the arena floor and blasting sand into his face. He had won. The final opponent was dead. The championship was his. But the announcer's voice, when it came, was shrill with something beyond excitement. An unprecedented heist. The arena itself bends to the champion's will. What is this? The overseer descends. A new pressure flooded the arena. Not gravity, something colder, more invasive. Kael felt it before he saw it, a suffocating aura that pressed against his mind, his spirit, his will to resist. He knew this sensation. It was the same theft he'd felt in the vault, the same oppressive void that had radiated from the overseer. She descended on a column of black light, her robes billowing with a wind that wasn't there. Her face was a mask of disciplined fury, lips pressed thin, eyes blazing with something that might have been hunger. The will-stealing aura intensified as she touched the sand, and even the crowd fell silent, cowed by the sheer pressure of her presence. You think you can steal from me? Her voice cut through the arena, inhaled by the Coliseum's own audio systems. You think you can rewrite my rules? She walked toward Kael, each step deliberate, the sand seeming to darken beneath. The overseer's laughter slithered through the Coliseum's shattered dome, a sound of pure, distilled malice. Kael's knees ground against the blood-slicked sands, his chest heaving, his mind a frayed tapestry of recent battles. The stolen submission still echoed in the arena's bones, a silent scream of broken chains, but here, in the shadow of the overseer, that absence felt like a lie. She loomed over him, a figure of translucent skin and writhing concept light, her hands tracing the air as if plucking harp strings only she could see. Each gesture tugged at the edges of his consciousness, and he felt his willpower sliding away, not like water, but like the memory of color. You think rebellion is a single act, little thief? The overseer's voice was honey and rust. Your theft of submission was a spark. I am the void that swallows sparks. Her fingers crooked, and Kael's head drooped lower. The weight of 1,000 forfeited victories pressed down, the accumulated surrender of every gladiator she had ever drained. He saw flashes of their broken dreams, felt the cold, comfortable emptiness that promised an end to struggle. But the arena remembered. Beneath him, the sand shivered with the lack of submission, the missing rule that once compelled every slave to obey the bell, the whip, the master's voice. He had taken it. He had wrenched it from the Coliseum's very fabric, and now that void was his, a hollow space where no command could take root. Kael's thoughts guttered like candles, yet one ember refused to die, I am not hers to command. Not anymore, Gritting his teeth, he reached not for her, but inward, toward that vacuum where submission used to live. He let the overseer's draining wash over him, but instead of filling him, it passed into the absence, finding no purchase. His own willpower, frayed, tattered, but stubborn, curled in that sacred emptiness. His knees left the ground. One trembling leg, then the other. He stood. The overseer's smile flickered, just for an instant. Impudence. But standing only makes the fall sweeter. She extended an arm, and the air around her palm hardened into a killing intent, a focused lance of pure lethality. This was no stolen concept, it was her own, the distilled endpoint of every fight she had ever won. She stepped forward to deliver the grip that would end him. Kael moved. Not with speed, but with the desperate clarity of a man out of options. His hand shot out, not to block, but to touch. His palm met her wrist as her fingers closed around his throat, or tried to. He didn't steal strength or speed. He reached deeper, into the abstract weave that bound her intention to its outcome. Abstract larceny shrieked through his nerves like molten glass. He felt the edges of his personhood fray, another shred of his humanity smoked away into the dark. But he seized the thread that connected cause to effect, the silent contract that said her strike would mean his death. And he pulled. For a heartbeat, the universe stuttered. The overseer's death grip phased through Kael's neck as though his flesh were mist. Her hand, dense with murderous certainty, passed through skin, muscle, bone, and emerged on the other side clutching nothing. The cause remained, her arm had moved, her will had intended, but the effect was gone, severed, floating somewhere between the stars. Kael's throat remained whole, his breath unbroken. Confusion ruined the overseer's perfect face. Her eyes widened, the concept light beneath her skin pulsing erratically. What? No, that is not possible, she stumbled, the follow-through of her attack carrying her past him, her balance unmoored by the missing conclusion. Overextension was a physical law she had forgotten. She teetered, arms flailing, and in that moment of bewilderment, the conceptual stomach she had boasted of, the metaphysical chamber where she stored her swallowed trophies, rippled visibly beneath her ribs, a warped pocket of reality. Kael didn't hesitate. He drove his hand forward, fingers piercing the distortion. The sensation was like plunging into a wound made of frozen screams and stolen tomorrows. Inside, shapes writhed, fragments of willpower stolen from 1,000 brows, embers of hope, whispers of loyalty, and there, burning with a soft, familiar light, the essence of his sister. It pulsed with the memory of her laughter, the warmth of shared childhood on a docking station long since scavenged. He closed his fist around it and yanked. The overseer shrieked as her belly tore open conceptually. A torrent of stolen will flooded outward, a radial wave of liberated volition. Across the Coliseum, spectators who had been dulled, obedient, suddenly gasped as their own fire returned. Guards blinked, their iron resolution dissolving into confusion. Slaves in the pits below felt the chains of obedience snap, not physical chains, but the ingrained imperative to submit. They looked at each other with new eyes. The overseer crumpled, her translucent form dimming, her power draining like light from a dead star. She clawed at the sand, but her fingers passed through the grains as if she were the phantom now. You don't understand, the balance. She whispered, but no one listened. Kael cradled the ember of sister's hope against his chest. It was warm, a heartbeat of its own, free from the overseer's stomach. He allowed himself one shuddering breath. Alarms erupted across the Coliseum, a cacophony of wailing sirens and malfunctioning light projectors. The systems that managed the arena, gravity fields, biosphere controls, containment walls, all hiccuped as the stolen submission continued its cascade of failure. The Grand Coliseum was no longer a prison of rules, it was a dying beast. He limped toward the nearest service tunnel, each step a negotiation with his own exhausted body. The AI chip in his neurals buzzed a warning, structural collapse imminent. Escape vector compromised. Imperial signature detected, massive displacement. Dreadnought class. It was too late to alter course. A shadow eclipsed the shattered dome, swallowing the flickering lights whole. The air thickened with the hum of gravity anchors and the cold, metallic scent of ionized atmosphere. Above, a ship blotted out the stars, a dreadnought bearing the Emperor's sigil, a golden sun devoured by a serpent. A voice boomed from the heavens, layers of authority woven into every syllable, a decree that bent physics by mere utterance. So you can steal concepts, little thief. Then steal this, my decree of your non-existence. The words were not sound, they were a command to the universe, an imperial edict that sought to unmake him from the timeline. Kael felt the fabric of his being twist, as if reality were a page being erased. But he had already been erasing himself, piece by piece, with every theft. He had learned the texture of his own concepts. And in the heartbeat before the Emperor's decree could latch onto his existence, Kael turned his abstract larceny inward. He stole, flee, from his own mind, the concept of flight, the instinct to retreat that had once been a coward's habit. He tore it out, and in its place, only the raw, unfettered impulse to move remained. His humanity bled a little more, another memory blurred, but his legs pumped without hesitation, without the pause that fear would have demanded. He ran. Not from the decree, but through the gap it hadn't yet closed, through the tunnel into the underbelly of a Coliseum that was falling apart. Behind him, the Emperor's voice echoed, but the dreadnought couldn't lock onto a target that had, for a flickering instant, detached itself from the concept of retreat. The shadow of the ship shrank as he dove deeper into the dark, the ember of his sister's hope lighting the way.